Hello, Internet! Lots to talk about today, specifically the subject of books versus movies. That is, the film adaptation of novels. So movies like The Hunger Games and Harry Potter and what have you. This is a topic I've debated over and over again, especially when a novel gets turned into a movie, because right after I see the movie, it seems that immediately I begin to see message boards and comments on Facebook and other social media just nitpicking every little detail of a film until there's really nothing left to enjoy from a viewer's perspective. If one little detail wasn't quite right for somebody, it might have completely ruined the film for them. So that leaves us as viewers with the question, which is better, the book or the film? Which do you prefer? I think internet culture has created this air of pretension about film adaptations, in which we are inclined to believe, regardless of the actual quality of the movie, that the book is always better. Almost always. When we read a book, we have a picture in our heads of what the characters are going to look like, what the setting is going to be, and we're going to have our own interpretations of character actions, plot, and what that's going to mean for the larger arc of the story. And when we see it portrayed in a way that we didn't really foresee, we kind of take that personally as readers. Same goes for comic books. The only people I've seen hit message boards harder than bookworms are comic bookworms, and that's because they take their canon as scripture. But what consumers don't really understand is that when Hollywood sits down to make a film adaptation of a novel, they don't owe you squat. Now, hopefully a producer has picked up a project and selected a director who's going to have a lot of care and thought put into the process and give a lot of thought to the huge fan base that might be behind a particular project. One of the greatest and most recent examples I've seen of this is Josh Boone, who directed The Fault in Our Stars. Just the anticipation brewing for that movie was so tangible, you could practically smell it. It smelled very strongly of adolescent angst and screaming teenage girl tears. And overall, the movie ended up being a very good adaptation of the book, skimping out on very few details and staying true to the characters. But this is not always the case, and you can't always expect a picture-perfect adaptation. Having said that, you have to know that the book is not always going to be better than the movie. There are a lot of really great movies that lose a lot of credit because the book is somehow miraculously better. There are a lot of reasons that a movie can be better than a book, but the two most common issues that I've normally seen are, one, the content of the book translated to the screen far better than it did in print. Number two, the legacy of the film far overshadows any glaring inaccuracies that it might have to the original text. We have to let go of this pretension that the book is always going to be better. I mean, please, quit lying to yourselves. On multiple occasions when the Harry Potter movies came out, I remember people being frustrated over how different the movies were from the books. That is, how many little details they left out. And I just kind of arched an eyebrow at that, metaphorically, because I can't actually arch my eyebrow. I was kind of like, are you serious? Have you read these books? If you had every little subplot and minor detail included in these movies, we would need 2, if not 3 movies devoted to each book. And then it would take 20 years to make them. And that's not ideal for the industry. You would have to start replacing the stars halfway through the franchise because they were getting too old. This is not like 90s television where you can just replace a main supporting character and hoping that the audience won't notice. The first issue of superior film adaptations, and notice that I do say superior because, in my opinion, these films are better than the books on which they're based. You might have a different opinion, which is totally fine. Not really interested in what your opinion is because I'm really just trying to explain a concept here. So just for argument's sake. Now, of course, it would be presumptuous for me to use examples of films or books that I had myself not read and or seen. So it's gonna force me to admit something really, really hard. Yes, I admit it. I read the first Twilight book. Forgive me, please. I was a young adolescent. I didn't know any better. And only the first one, for good reason. Bella Swan, the angsty and whiny protagonist, spends most of the novel narrating the story with inner thought. And if you saw the movie, that cool action sequence in the end, yeah, I'll let you in a little secret here. In the book, she was completely knocked out for that. So after drudging us through pages and pages of dreadful and dry, wretched narration, she deprives us of the best part of the whole story, which is the fight scene. The movie's a vast improvement on that, because not only are you spared most of the narration, and Edward's brooding is cut in half to spare us all, like, you get more of the action. It's far more exciting. The content of the story at its skeleton translated better to the screen than it did on the page, even if it does remain a morally reprehensible story about toxic relationships and how important it is to have them. Not the example I would have chosen if I had more examples of books and movies that I had both seen. The second most common reason I see for why movies are better than the books they're based on is that the legacy of the film far outshines the original book. If you ask me, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is much better than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. It is practically unfair to compare them given the amount of differences between the book and the movie. I prefer the characters' performances in the movie versus how they are read in the book. I like the songs, I like the set, I like the direction. I love it all. It's classic. Gene Wilder especially. He's one of my favorite actors of all time. I'm going to repeat an often shared story of Hollywood in which Gene Wilder specifically did the entrance. Like the very first time you see Wonka on camera, the very first time he walks out, he's old and crippled and decrepit looking. And then, of course, finally, he does that amazing black flip. Gene Wilder said that he wanted to do that specifically because then, from then on in the movie, you would never know whether or not Wonka was lying or telling the truth. It was going to create an air of mystery about the character. But Roald Dahl hated that. He hated the whole movie. He said that that whole stunt that Gene Wilder pulled at the beginning of his performance was ridiculous and unnecessary, even though for most people it's their favorite part of the movie. Dahl is a card-carrying member of the Scorned Authors Club, along with P.L. Travers, Stephen King, Winston Groom, Bret Eaton Ellis, all authors who hated the movies that were based on their books. But everyone else in the world loves the movie. Gene Wilder's performance as Willy Wonka is one of the most iconic in American film. Coincidentally, films adapted from other books of authors I mentioned are also wildly popular in film literature. It wasn't even well known that Mary Poppins was based on books until the release of Disney's Saving Mr. Banks earlier this year. As rosy as that movie painted that situation, Ms. Travers stated in her will, her last will and testament, this was her dying wish, that no other movies would be made out of her books by Hollywood. She was too scarred by the experience. And any further adaptations of her books, like the musical, the Broadway musical Mary Poppins, would be permissible as long as no American had any hand in the process whatsoever. Like, I think that pretty much sums up some pretty negative feelings about it. So what's my point? I'm not trying to get you to lower your expectations when you walk into a theater. You're paying far too much money for a movie that in a few months you'll be able to see in your own home for free. Is Hollywood gonna screw things up? Yes! Oh my god, it's like it's in the job description or something. There are some boils on the butt of film history so large and gross that we can never forgive them. But what I encourage you to be objective about when you see a film adaptation of a book you love, or maybe it's something else that you enjoy like comic books, is how well did the content translate to the screen? How well did the director and the artists behind this entire process put that story on display for you? And even if they didn't get every little detail right, if a character was blonde instead of brunette, or if they left out a side character or combined a couple of characters to save time, even after all of that, was it worth the price of the movie ticket? I'm looking forward to hearing your guys' comments on this subject. Just leave them below. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Tumblr. Links in the description. Thanks for watching!